The lights went up, but Johnny Carson was standing in the shadows, risking his entire career to end a guest who was waiting just backstage. This rising star had committed a cruel, petty humiliation years earlier against one of the show's invisible heroes, and Carson had just learned the full, ugly truth. The price of that secret fight was the most shocking on-air drama The Tonight Show ever saw. The king of late night was risking a $15 million contract over a simple, quiet man the audience would never see. It was 1975, the undisputed height of the king's reign, and The Tonight Show was more than a program. It was a revered national institution, where the slightest deviation from the meticulous schedule felt like a perilous tremor in the American psyche. But on this pivotal Tuesday night in September, the smooth, unflappable rhythm of late-night television was utterly shattered, not by a technical fault, but by the quiet, absolute moral refusal of the man in charge. The audience, having enjoyed a successful commercial break, sat patiently waiting for the evening's main attraction, a rising young comedic star named Ronnie Dale. Ronnie Dale was sharp, handsome, and equipped with a raw, kinetic talent that had network executives openly dreaming of his lucrative future potential. He was exactly the kind of celebrated, ambitious guest Carson's show was built to launch. The script was perfectly placed on Johnny's desk, the jokes already honed, the introduction card waiting for him to read it. But Johnny stood 6 feet from the curtain, his gaze locked on the frantic producer, Marty Cain, with a look of quiet intensity that would have stopped a tank cold. He'd handled presidential scandals, temperamental superstars, and live animal escapes, all without ever blinking or losing control. But tonight, a simple 3x5 introduction card broke him entirely. Marty was sweating profusely, his crisp shirt clinging to his back. He was a man audibly crumbling under the immense professional pressure of keeping the schedule and managing a legend's sudden revolt. "Johnny, we're back at 10. The card. Just read the card, please," he pleaded, his voice a desperate, frantic whisper the boom microphones mercifully couldn't catch. The intro card was a standard lead-in for Ronnie Dale's rapid rise, but Johnny didn't take the card. He didn't even glance at it. He was a figure of absolute, terrifying control who, in that singular moment, had chosen to lose it entirely. Carson had seen thousands of talents come and go, but never one carried such a deep, corrosive entitlement, a quality he found deeply and personally offensive to the spirit of the entire profession. Johnny's stillness was potent, a kind of coiled aggression. He shook his head once, a gesture so small it was barely visible, yet it carried the crushing weight of canceling the entire broadcast. "I won't do it, Marty," he said, his voice flat, gravely quiet, filled with conviction. "I am not introducing that man. Not tonight, not ever." This was not an argument about ratings or contract clauses. It was a battle waged over basic human decency itself. What could possibly possess the king of late night, a man who had built his entire career on his impenetrable cool, to abandon his post and sacrifice network relations for an unannounced, unprecedented protest? The crew, hidden silently in the shadows of the wings, felt the tension snap like a live wire. Ed McMahon, alone on the stage, started humming softly, desperately buying time with sheer, palpable nervous force. The secret was buried deep in Ronnie Dale's past, a dark, petty humiliation he had inflicted years earlier, not on a fellow celebrity, but on one of the quiet, invisible heroes of the show. And Johnny Carson, who valued fierce loyalty above all the superficial glamour, had only just learned the full, ugly truth. The curtain was seconds from rising. The man the audience expected to see was waiting, oblivious that his entire career was being dismantled by the one man who wielded the power to save it. But before Johnny could be persuaded back to the desk, Marty Cain didn't just need to know the reason. He desperately needed to stop the $5 million broadcast from being canceled in the next 40 seconds. The commercial break was down to 5 seconds, then 4, and as Ed McMahon offered a manic, elongated laugh that sounded closer to a cry for help, Marty Cain placed a trembling hand on the legend's arm, a clear, cardinal violation of the unspoken rule. Panic had shredded all protocol. Marty's voice was barely a squeak, pleading, "Johnny, they're pulling the plug. The network is calling. You have to go out there. This is career destruction." Johnny merely looked at the frantic producer, his eyes glacial and unwavering. It was a devastating, immovable resolve that transcended fear. The cameras were hot, the show was live, and the host's chair behind the famous desk remained hauntingly empty. Johnny Carson was not thinking of contracts or headlines. He was seeing the face of a man who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, whose quiet dignity had been brutally trampled years ago by the very celebrity waiting patiently in the green room. The truth had arrived just an hour earlier, delivered in the form of a quiet, hesitant word from a trusted veteran stagehand. The stagehand had finally worked up the courage to share the story of a cruel, public humiliation inflicted by a young, hungry comedian. That comedian was Ronnie Dale, and the insult was a calculated act designed to make the crew member feel small and utterly worthless, a cheap casualty of Ronnie Dale's brazen climb to fame. For Johnny, this was not just a breach of contract. It was a crisis of faith that went to the moral foundation of his entire career. He had built his immense kingdom on the bedrock of genuine respect. He was notorious for knowing every crew member's name, for treating the camera operators and the lighting guys with the same easy dignity he afforded a president. To him, the star was nothing without the tireless, unseen work of the crew, and Ronnie Dale's past actions represented the very worst kind of entitled celebrity arrogance, the kind that kicks the ladder out from under the essential people who literally build the set. "Marty, I told you," Johnny repeated, his voice gravely low, the conviction unwavering. "We don't celebrate snakes here. If he walks onto that stage, he spits on every single person who works on this show." The producer tried desperately to argue contracts and fines, but Johnny cut him off with a definitive motion. He only cared about the sacred principle that the show was a cohesive family, and a member of that family had been grievously injured. The irony was suffocating. Johnny, the master of cool, was now risking his entire legacy over a long-forgotten slight. He simply wanted to use the immense, quiet power of his presence to say, definitively, no. The lights on the stage were harsh and unforgiving, but in the gloom, Johnny Carson felt the cold, hard weight of morality pressing down. He was ready to walk away from the biggest stage in the world to protect a single, worthy man the audience would never even see. The clock had run out. The network had cut to a rerun. The true victim of this standoff was still miles away in the green room, utterly unaware that the man who had wronged him years ago was about to learn the brutal price of decency. You've just witnessed Johnny Carson put his entire legendary career on the line for a secret loyalty. If you want to know the incredible payoff of this moral stand and what happened to the star who waited in vain, hit that subscribe button now to follow this unforgettable story. While panic seized the executive hallway, the atmosphere in the famous green room remained suffocatingly serene, yet subtly infused with silent contempt from the staff. Ronnie Dale was oblivious, lounging on the plush sofa, his big moment abruptly replaced by a rerun of a Dean Martin roast. He held a glass of expensive spirits, telling loud, self-congratulatory stories, completely unaware that the staff serving him drinks were regarding him as something contemptible, something that needed to be cleaned off the carpet. But the real focal point was Frankie, the stagehand, the quiet, dependable heart of Studio One, 30 years spent ensuring the sets rolled in perfectly. Frankie was the type of man who showed up 30 minutes early and left 30 minutes late. Not for praise, but because his word was his bond. He was the quiet clockwork, a man of few words and profound loyalty. Tonight, Frankie was stationed near the hallway, his usual patient stoicism betrayed by the crushing internal tension of the last hour. It was Frankie's silent, long-held ordeal that had brought the king to a standstill. Years ago, Frankie had helped the starving comic, even giving him $1,000, a huge sum for a working man, to cover a financial emergency. That $1,000 was nearly half of Frankie's annual salary, a sacrifice Ronnie Dale had treated like loose change. Ronnie Dale repaid that loyalty with a humiliating public act of utter coldness. The moment occurred at a small charity event. Ronnie Dale, having just landed his first big television gig, was treating his former allies like dirt. When Frankie approached him to congratulate him, Ronnie Dale not only pretended not to know him, but publicly mocked Frankie's simple working-class attire, loudly dismissing him as the help. The cruelest part was that Frankie had desperately needed that $1,000 for his young daughter's essential medical procedure. The words were calculated to his identity as a provider and a man of honest work. Frankie had swallowed the insult and the debt, vowing never to seek repayment. But the other stagehands and crew members, the unseen family of The Tonight Show, never forgot that grievous moment. They saw Ronnie Dale's arrogance as a direct violation of their sacred code. When Johnny Carson found out the full story, it was the tale of a man who willingly trampled a good person for the sake of his own elevated image. Now, Ronnie Dale was holding court in the green room, a ticking time bomb of ignorance and supreme entitlement, utterly unaware that the quiet, beloved stagehand he had insulted was about to become the precise reason his biggest opportunity would be permanently withdrawn. The only thing separating Ronnie Dale from the national spotlight was a short hallway, and the unwavering conviction of Johnny Carson, who is now preparing to walk in and deliver a lesson no amount of fame or fortune could possibly buy. The door swung open, and the easy laughter in the green room instantly. It was Johnny Carson, but he wasn't dressed for the desk, and the warmth was gone from his face. He was there to talk not about comedy, but about grave consequences. The laughter of the green room the moment Johnny Carson stepped through the doorway. He did not enter like a television host. He moved like an avenging angel of integrity, his powerful presence instantly silencing the small, celebratory crowd. Marty Kane, the producer, tried desperately to intercept him, but Johnny moved past him as if he were invisible, his entire focus resting on the young comedian whose big break was dissolving into a moral reckoning. Ronnie Dale, momentarily stunned by the sight of the king of late night not at his desk, scrambled anxiously to his feet. "Mr. Carson, what an honor! I was just telling the guys about—" Johnny cut him off, not with a shout or a dramatic monologue, but with a voice so low and steady it carried 1,000 times the menace of any scream. "You were just telling the guys about the climb, Ronnie. You forgot who held the ladder." The accusation hung heavy and poisonous in the air. Ronnie Dale's confusion quickly curdled into thick defensiveness. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." Johnny stepped closer, forcing the younger man to meet his unyielding gaze. "I'm talking about Frankie, the man who runs the rigging, who fixed the lights, who believed in you enough to give you $1,000 when you were sleeping in your car." Johnny paused, letting the full weight of the sum and the betrayal sink in. "And when he came to say congratulations, you called him the help and turned your back on him? You shamed him in front of his wife, Ronnie. You shamed him for doing honest work." Ronnie Dale tried feebly to deny it, but Johnny wasn't interested in excuses. He was interested only in the fundamental principle of the stagehand's dignity, which he considered absolute. "When I started here, I didn't have a name," Johnny said, his voice now imbued with the deep, intimate authority that had commanded millions for years. "I wasn't famous, but I had the respect of the crew. When I saw what you did to Frankie, I remembered something. Years ago, Frankie helped me through a tough time, a personal crisis the papers never knew about. I made him a private promise. As long as I sat behind that desk, no one would ever treat a member of this crew like garbage again. That I would always stand for the quiet decency that keeps this entire circus running." This wasn't about Frankie's hurt feelings. It was about the profound sanctity of a quiet vow. It was the weight of that unwritten promise, made years ago, that now prevented the king of late night from introducing the hottest young comic in America. "So you see, Ronnie," Johnny concluded, pulling the crumpled introduction card from Marty's hand and tearing it in half with deliberate force. "I can't introduce you tonight, because if I introduce you, I will break my word." and I break my word to the people who matter most." The two pieces of card fluttered to the carpet, a silent symbolic of Ronnie Dale's career. The sound of the thick paper ripping was the loudest sound in the entire studio, a material representation of Ronnie Dale's shattered future. The room was stone cold, the silence heavy and complete. Ronnie Dale was left utterly alone with the bitter realization that his own sheer arrogance had been his definitive undoing, canceled by a single act of profound, protective loyalty. Johnny Carson just put a forgotten stagehand's dignity above his network contract because of a private promise. Have you ever had to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves? Share your story in the comments below, and let us know what true loyalty means to you. While the wreckage of Ronnie Dale's career settled silently, the chaos on the other side of the stage had intensified into a desperate ballet of damage control. On the main stage, Ed McMahon, the ultimate wingman, was performing one of the most stressful acts of his career, stretching a simple 15-second segment into an impossible, agonizing 3 minutes. Ed wasn't humming jokes. He was sweating through his suit, his trademark smile stretched so thin it looked like a grimace. He knew if he stalled 1 second too long, the red network light would blink and the entire broadcast would go black, leading inevitably to disaster. Ed knew Johnny's refusal was a non-negotiable matter of principle. He held the stage, sweating under the unforgiving lights, knowing that every single second he stalled meant Johnny was sacrificing his massive professional capital. Marty Kane was now hopelessly embroiled in a frantic 3-way conference call. Network executives screamed threats of contract breach and the complete termination of the broadcast. "You tell him," one executive's voice shrieked, clearly audible even over the crackle of the phone, "that we do not halt a national broadcast for a stagehand. He has to honor the booking, or we will hold him personally responsible for the lost revenue." The historical weight of the moment was crushing. Marty tried one final, desperate intervention. "Please, Johnny, you can't hear career over this," Marty pleaded, gripping his arm tightly. "This isn't about you protecting him. This is about them. Don't throw it all away. You can take care of Frankie later, privately. Just do the introduction, smile, and we make this go away." Marty was appealing to the practical, fearful man. But Johnny's legendary cool had completely evaporated, replaced by a deep, fierce conviction that this was the only time, the only platform, to make his stand truly meaningful. "No, Marty," Johnny finally said. "This is where you draw the line. If I introduce him, I tell every crew member in this building that their dignity is negotiable, and I won't do that, not even for the network." He looked toward the dark corner where the entire crew watched in hushed silence. His eyes caught a subtle movement. Frankie, the stagehand, watching the entire argument, his face held quiet agony, realizing that the man who was fighting for his honor was now risking his entire kingdom. And Frankie, the man of silent dignity and quiet heroism, began to move slowly out of the shadows, ready to sacrifice his own honor for the sake of the king's safety. The weight of the network's demands vanished as Johnny's eyes locked onto Frankie. Frankie was illuminated by the harsh, distant spill of the stage lights, his expression a portrait of silent, profound acceptance and sorrow. He understood the immense, career-ending sacrifice Johnny was contemplating. Johnny saw the man's eyes, etched by 30 years of quiet dedication. In that long, wordless exchange, Johnny was fighting for Frankie's dignity, but Frankie was fighting for Johnny's career and legacy. Frankie took 2 hesitant steps forward. "Mr. Carson," he whispered, his voice dry and rough, "you don't have to do this." The words were a dagger to Johnny's heart. "Yes, I do, Frankie," Johnny replied, his voice soft with respect. "I made a promise, and what that man did to you, it was wrong. This isn't about him being punished. It's about you being seen." Frankie shook his head slowly, the movement heavy with regret. "The show is bigger than one man, sir. You are the show, Mr. Carson. If you quit now, they don't just cause great suffering to me. They cause great suffering to the band, the writers, the cameramen, the good people who look up to you. Don't let him cause great suffering to your family." This was the ultimate test. Frankie was asking Johnny to retreat to protect the whole vital ecosystem of the show. Johnny saw the genuine good heart of the man standing before him. It was a kind of quiet, powerful, heroic sacrifice. He knew then that going back to the desk would be a professional surrender, but walking away entirely would be an unforgivable betrayal of the community Frankie sought to protect. Johnny reached out, placing his hand gently on Frankie's shoulder, a gesture of profound mutual respect. The final decision was made, sealed by shared principle. Johnny's eyes hardened with resolve. He gently pushed the intro card back into Marty Kane's trembling hand, turning his back on the stage entirely and leaving the green room stunned and irrevocably silent. Frankie's silent plea asked Johnny to sacrifice his dignity for the good of the team. If you've ever witnessed an act of quiet, profound loyalty like this, share this powerful story to remind others that true heroes often work behind the scenes. The choice had been made, cemented by a quiet exchange of profound respect. With a resolute motion, Johnny pushed the remains of the introduction card back to Marty and walked toward the profound solitude of his private dressing room. He left behind a green room where Ronnie Dale stood utterly defeated, his face pale with the sudden, agonizing comprehension that the king of late night had not merely rejected his act, but had rejected him as a man. Ronnie Dale's manager rushed forward in disbelief, realizing the career was over. Ronnie Dale finally understood. Being banned by Johnny Carson was an indelible mark of moral failure, a quiet whisper of contempt that would follow him forever. The silence of the green room was the sound of a once promising career quietly, completely disintegrating. Johnny was already inside his dressing room. He walked straight to the telephone. This was the defining moment where he put his own massive authority on the line, confronting the corporate behemoth head-on. He placed a call directly to the highest-ranking network executive. When Johnny spoke, his voice was the quiet finality of a judge passing a sentence, chillingly measured. He issued a single, non-negotiable decree. "I will not introduce Ronnie Dale," he stated. "You can fine me, you can sue me, but I will not read the card. We are running 5 minutes late, find a replacement guest. And if you force that man onto my stage, I will simply walk out and never come back." It was an abdication, a breathtaking threat to leave the most coveted job in America, all for the sake of a promise made years ago to a man who fixed the lights. The king showed his true reign was built on immovable integrity. The executives understood immediately. They couldn't fire Carson, he was late at night. The humiliation for Ronnie Dale was total, irreversible, and absolute. Johnny hung up the phone. He stood there with the quiet exhaustion of a man who has fought a difficult, necessary battle. The show was back on the air, salvaged by a frantic introduction of Doc Severinsen. But the guest chair was still empty, a stark, gleaming reminder that some debts are paid in the currency of public dignity, not dollars. The true payoff was the silent, profound recognition that had just passed between a legend and a man who was once the help. The stage was cold, the silence thick with confusion, as Ed McMahon, having exhausted every possible anecdote, introduced a hastily rearranged segment. The audience was confused. They were expecting Ronnie Dale. The palpable awkwardness was a living thing that night. People at home instantly sensed the disruption. The host was nowhere to be seen. Johnny Carson had created a sudden, magnetic vacuum of confusion that signaled something profound and unexpected had occurred. Meanwhile, the full weight of that vacuum crushed Ronnie Dale. His manager, Stan, rushed back in. The sound of Doc Severinsen's trumpet blaring from the monitor was confirmation enough. "They cut the interview," Stan gasped. "They've pulled the appearance. You are no longer welcome in Studio One. Ever." The cancellation was an official decree of professional exile. It told the entire industry, without a word from Johnny, that Ronnie Dale was morally toxic. The message was unmistakable. If the king won't introduce you, no one should. Ronnie Dale's arrogance instantly crumbled. But why? Over some old story? Over some stagehand? His voice was thin and desperately wounded. Stan looked at him with a cold assessment. "It was Frankie. Carson canceled you because he made a promise. And he proved tonight that his word is worth more than all of Madison Avenue. The most excruciating part of the night was the profound silence that followed the musical number. When the camera cut back to the stage, the famous guest chair stood empty, a stark, humiliating monument to the comic who wasn't there. Ronnie Dale was staring at that empty chair when the message came through from the network. All future negotiations were terminated. His manager left him alone in the green room, a rising star put out by the quiet conscience of Johnny Carson. But the scene of the quiet lesson was yet to come, as Johnny had one final act of loyalty to perform. Not for the benefit of the cameras, but for the one man whose dignity he had risked everything to defend. The closing music had faded, the house lights beginning to dim. Johnny Carson found Frankie sitting alone on an overturned crate in the shadowed corner of the set. He sat down on the floor next to him. He simply apologized. "I'm sorry I made a scene, Frankie," Johnny said softly. "You asked me not to, and I went against your wishes. I risked the whole enterprise over a debt I owed you." Frankie slowly turned his head. "It was never about the money, Mr. Carson. That $1,000 I needed for my daughter. She had a heart condition. When Ronnie Dale shamed me publicly, he made me feel like I was jeopardizing my daughter's welfare." Frankie's voice caught, thick with raw emotion. "That's what hurts, sir. Feeling like I couldn't provide." The true cruelty was finally laid bare, an attack on a father's ability to protect his child. Johnny listened, understanding that his initial moral outrage had only scratched the surface. This was why the refusal had been so profoundly necessary. It was a defense of the family. "You didn't risk the show for a debt, Frankie," Johnny finally replied, his voice rough. "You risked it for what's right. The show works because of people like you." The lesson that man needed wasn't about contracts. It was about loyalty. He needed to know that being famous doesn't give you permission to be cruel. Johnny stood up, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver key. It was the master key to the lighting control booth, the most protected space in the studio. It wasn't a duplicate, it was the master key, the key only the show's senior producer and Carson himself held. By handing it to Frankie, Johnny was literally granting him power and authority over the physical set, a visible symbol of trust. "This key belongs to me," Johnny said, placing it gently in Frankie's calloused hand. "I want you to have it. I want you to know that as long as I'm here, you are the highest authority in that room. You were seen tonight, Frankie, and you are valuable. More valuable than any arrogant comedian we could ever book." Frankie looked at the key, then up at Johnny, and the stagehand, the man of quiet composure, finally broke, tears streaming down his face. It was the profound, symbolic recognition that his simple dignity was non-negotiable. It was the cathartic payoff of a promise kept. The master key was placed gently into Frankie's hand, a silent decree that the king of late night's true court was composed not of stars, but of the loyal few. The stagehand, for the first time in years, felt the heavy weight of his old humiliation finally lifted, replaced by the weight of absolute, recognized value. Ronnie Dale's career never recovered. It was a swift, complete fueled by the quiet, absolute moral refusal of the one man who could have made him a star. The word went out faster than any public announcement. Ronnie Dale was untouchable, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of network television about toxic celebrity entitlement. Johnny Carson never spoke publicly about the incident. He allowed the industry to believe it was a contractual dispute, anything but the truth, that he risked his kingdom to defend a quiet stagehand. But the true meaning of the refusal was the ultimate, profound defense of dignity. Carson was teaching a lesson that fame often obscures, that the respect given to the man who sets the lights should be equal to the respect given to the man who steps into the spotlight. The weight of the empty chair became a silent moral compass for everyone in Hollywood. Frankie, the stagehand, carried the small silver master key on his keyring for the rest of his career. He never boasted, becoming even quieter, imbued with the deep satisfaction of knowing his value was acknowledged. People who knew him said something subtly shifted in Johnny after that night. His legendary kindness was rooted in a fierce, protective conviction. The whole event cemented his legacy not just as a comedian, but as a man of principle who understood that true power is measured by how you treat those who can do nothing for you. The world measures success in applause, but on that night, Johnny Carson showed America that the only currency that truly matters is loyalty. He chose his solemn private promise over the biggest stage in the world, proving that standing up for the invisible person sometimes requires the greatest act of visibility. When Johnny Carson retired 17 years later, Frankie was still there. As the final curtain came down, Johnny caught Frankie's eye. The stagehand touched the pocket where he kept his keys. It was a final, silent salute. The debt was paid, the promise kept. The question wasn't why Johnny Carson refused to introduce the guest. The real question this story forces us to confront is, when the camera is off and you're the only one watching, are you still willing to fight for the dignity of the person standing beside you? Johnny Carson, the man who commanded the attention of the nation every night, answered that question with a single, dramatic, unforgettable act of quiet honor. The king of late night wasn't just entertaining America, he was teaching us how to be decent, one unexpected, heartwarming refusal at a time. This was the moment Johnny Carson risked his legacy for the sake of a promise. If this tale of profound commitment moved you, please leave a like and subscribe to join our community, where we uncover the human heart behind the biggest legends. Thanks for watching.